The first storm came without warning. No satellite network had seen it gathering, no ancient array in orbit had registered its approach. It unfolded like a rip across the face of the sky, a rolling blanket of flame-colored clouds that swallowed the sun. Men and women working in the fields of the outer settlements looked up and thought the heavens themselves had caught fire. At first, no one panicked. The colony had endured its share of strange weather, for the planet was young and half-tamed. The settlers knew what it meant to endure hostile soil, strange climates, and storms that could rip roofs from their foundations. They were descendants of those who had left a faraway Earth in search of something better. Endurance was their heritage, but this storm was different. It did not simply lash the land with wind and lightning, it left scars. Where the red clouds passed, machines faltered. The drones that tilled the soil dropped lifeless into the dirt, their processors fried. Generators flickered and failed. Weapons that had not been drawn in years became useless lumps of metal. Only the old, crude things, tools powered by muscle or simple mechanics, remained untouched. The settlers soon learned a truth that shook them to their core. Something was hunting them, and it was not a storm at all. On the third day, when the sky returned to its cold silver blue, figures walked from the horizon. They did not look like soldiers. They did not look like anything born of flesh. They strode across the fields with the confidence of owners surveying what was already theirs, metal bodies gleaming, strange patterns crawling across their surfaces like molten veins. Their voices were like the grinding of stone. They spoke of reclamation. The settlers had no name for them. The children gave them one in whispers, the harvesters. Aurelian Stathies had been born beneath the copper sky of the colony's winter, in a farmhouse that still smelled of timber cut from forests no one had bothered to name. His parents had once been engineers, but like so many who fled Earth, they had traded steel for soil. The dream was simple: live free, live apart from the endless hierarchies of the core worlds, live without being told what to build, whom to serve, or how to fight. That dream was ashes now. Aurelian stood on the remains of a ridgeline, staring at the column of smoke rising from what had once been his neighbor's homestead. The harvesters had come in the night, moving without ships or shuttles, without warning or sound. They had no need for fire when they could simply shut machines down with the wave of a hand. When resistance came, they took no prisoners, and yet they did not kill indiscriminately. That was what unsettled him most. They culled. The old, the sick, the young, they were taken. No blood, no bodies. Simply absence. The harvesters would march into a settlement, let their storm roll through, and when it passed, hundreds of people would be gone. Those who remained were left to mourn and wonder what purpose their kin now served. Aurelian clenched the haft of the axe in his hand. It was an absurd weapon against what had come. He knew that. Everyone did. But axes and hammers and fire were all that still obeyed them. "You will break your grip if you strangle it harder," said a voice behind him. He turned. Callista Aeon stood on the ridge, her dark hair swept back by the wind, her eyes sharp as shards of obsidian. She had once been a physician, trained on the orbital academies of the core, but she had thrown that life away for the same reason the others had. Here she was a leader, though no one had named her as such. She commanded not through title, but through the certainty of her voice. "They are moving west," Aurelian said, nodding toward the smoke. "By nightfall, they will reach the river crossings. Then we cannot linger." Callista's eyes did not flinch from the distant ruin. "Gather the others, we take what can be carried and move for the highlands." Aurelian hesitated. "How long can we keep running?" "As long as we must." Her answer was the same it had been since the harvesters first came, practical, unyielding, and yet Aurelian heard the strain in it. She was tired. They all were. "They are not chasing us without reason," he said at last. "They take who they choose, they burn what they please, and yet they follow. There must be something they want." "There is always something they want," Callista said softly. "The mistake is in believing we can bargain with it." Aurelian wanted to argue, but there was no time. A horn's mournful cry rolled across the valley below, the signal of another approach. The harvesters were closer than he thought. He looked to Callister. "Then we run again." She gave a single nod. "And we make them regret every step they take upon our soil." By nightfall, the settlers had gathered what little they could carry: tools, water, a few crates of seeds that might one day grow into fields again. The children clung to their parents, too weary to cry. The old walked with the strength of memory more than muscle. They moved through the highland passes, torches dimmed to pinpricks. The stars above were cold and endless. Some whispered prayers to the earth they had never seen. Others cursed the sky for bringing them here. It was Aurelian who walked rearmost, axe slung across his back. He kept his eyes on the ridges, waiting for the glint of molten veins, for the sound of stone grinding upon stone. The harvesters were methodical, patient. They had no need to rush. At the third watch, when the children had fallen asleep across their mothers' shoulders, the ground began to hum, not quake, hum. A vibration that crawled up from the soles of their boots into their bones, steady and inescapable. "They are close," Callister whispered, her voice carrying further than she intended in the silence. The settlers froze. They did not weep. They did not shout. They simply looked to one another, eyes wide, knowing what always followed. Aurelian felt the axe grow heavier in his hand, as though the harvester storm was already reaching for it. He thought of his father, who had once told him that man was not born to be prey. He thought of the endless running, the endless hiding, the endless fear. When the first figure appeared on the ridge above, towering, luminous veins crawling across its chest like rivers of fire, Aurelian did not wait for the order to flee. He ran forward, shouting like a madman, and swung his axe with all the fury he had left. The blade met metal with a ringing crack. Sparks flew. The harvester staggered, more from surprise than pain. Its faceless head tilted, as though it were studying an insect that had chosen to sting rather than crawl. And for the first time, Aurelian saw hesitation in the enemy. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough to change everything. The fight that followed was not victory. The settlers lost too many, and the harvesters withdrew not from fear, but from curiosity. Yet in the ashes of that clash, a truth revealed itself. The harvesters could bleed, not blood, not flesh, but something bright and molten that hissed when it touched the ground, something that suggested they were not untouchable. When Aurelian told the others what he had seen, their despair did not vanish, but it shifted. Fear became anger. Anger became resolve. They were still prey, but prey with teeth. Callister stood before the settlers that night, torchlight painting her face in fire. "They have mistaken us for a people who will bow. They have mistaken us for soil to be plowed and bodies to be gathered. They have mistaken us for anything less than what we are." Her voice rose, sharp and unshaken. "We are human, and no storm will unmake us." The settlers roared their answer into the night, and for the first time since the harvesters came, the sound was not of mourning. It was of war. The valley of Calrose had once been a place of promise. Its soil was rich, its rivers ran clear, and the hills were gentle enough that the settlers had believed, foolishly perhaps, that they had found the safest corner of their new world. The first seed sown here had given the settlers wheat high as a man's chest, and for a short time there had been laughter that felt almost like the tales told of Earth's golden fields. Now the valley was a graveyard. Blackened husks of farmhouses leaned like broken teeth across the ridges. The once bright rivers ran sluggish and dark, filled with ash. The wheat lay trampled, not by cattle or storm, but by the march of metal feet. No birds sang. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Into this silence came the remnants of the settlement, the last 150 souls who had evaded the harvester's net. They did not come to reclaim the valley. They came to decide whether to keep running or to stand at last. Callister Ayan walked at the front of the line, her steps unshaken, though her face carried shadows of exhaustion. She had been the one to guide them through the mountain passes. She had been the one to choose which families were worth risking the trek and which must scatter. It was her voice that calmed the children when they asked where their fathers had gone, and her eyes that stared at the fire at night long after the others had fallen asleep. But she was only one woman. As they reached the broken skeleton of what had once been a granary tower, Aurelian Stathias called the halt. He was no leader by nature, but men followed him because he did not flinch when others froze. He carried the axe that had drawn harvester blood, and though he told himself he was no different than any other, he could not deny that the settlers looked at him with something like hope. The people gathered in the shadow of the tower. Fires were lit in shallow pits, smoke hidden beneath wet grass. Children huddled against their mothers. The old sank to the ground with sighs of relief that were half despair. When Callister climbed the rubble of the granary and stood where all could see her, silence fell. "We have run for weeks," she said. Her voice carried not because it was loud, but because it was steady. "We have hidden, we have starved, we have watched our kin taken from us. Each day we have told ourselves that if we endure one more night, perhaps the storm will pass." Her gaze swept across them. No one looked away. "The storm does not pass." A murmur rippled through the crowd, half anger, half fear. Callister raised a hand and it stilled. "They will not stop because we yield. They will not stop because we hide. They will not stop until every one of us is gone. You know this as I do, and yet," she paused, letting the word hang, "they are not gods, they bleed." Now the murmur was different. There was fire in it. Aurelian saw heads lift, shoulders straighten. They had seen the molten fluid hiss against the ground. They had smelled its acrid smoke. Proof. "We are human," Callister said. "We are not machines to be harvested, not cattle to be led. We are born to fight for the soil beneath our feet and the stars above our heads. If they want to claim us, let them choke on the cost." The crowd answered with a ragged cheer, not the cry of soldiers, but of farmers and smiths and children who had lost everything but fury. Aurelian stepped forward then, not climbing the rubble, but speaking from among them. "I have struck them. I know the sound of their metal breaking. They are strong, yes, and their storms tear the fire from our machines, but they are not invincible. With steel in our hands and fire in our hearts, we can cut them, we can burn them, we can teach them what it means to hunt men who refuse to kneel." Now the cheer was louder, echoing off the broken walls. Callister looked down at him, and for the first time in weeks, there was something like a smile on her lips. It was not joy. It was a grim satisfaction that said the decision had been made. That night, plans were drawn. They had no rifles, no drones, no artillery. All of it lay dead under the touch of the storms. But they had fire, they had blades, they had cunning, and they had the fury of a cornered people. The settlers split into groups. The smiths, few as they were, began reforging plowshares and broken tools into crude weapons. Axes were sharpened until they gleamed. Spears were tipped with whatever scrap could be hammered into lethal points. Nets were braided not for fishing, but for tangling the long limbs of the harvesters. The hunters taught traps, pits lined with sharpened stakes, weighted logs hung by ropes, ready to swing down on unsuspecting prey. Even the children helped, carrying stones and weaving bindings. No one was idle, for idleness meant death. Aurelian led the bands that scouted the valley's edge. They found signs of the enemy easily, melted earth where their storms had rolled, footprints pressed deep into the soil, not round like a man's, but ridged and angular, as though a machine had chosen the mockery of a step. On the third day, one of the scouts did not return. They found his body at the foot of the hills, untouched by storm but broken cleanly in half, as though the harvester had wanted to leave a message. The settlers buried him in silence. No songs, no words, only earth over earth. Afterward, Aurelian sharpened his axe until his palms bled. The first real clash came at dawn. The harvesters did not march in endless waves. They came in groups, as if testing, probing, learning. This time, 5 of them descended the ridge into the valley, their molten veins burning bright in the half-light. The ground shivered with their steps. The settlers lay in wait. Nets stretched across the narrow pass, traps hidden in the tall grass, torches soaked in oil. When the harvesters reached the midpoint, Aurelian gave the signal. The nets dropped, tangling the limbs of 2 of the machines. They staggered, tearing at the cords, but in that moment, settlers rushed from the shadows. Spears plunged, Axes swung, torches ignited. One harvester fell, molten fluid spilling like a river of fire. The settlers screamed their triumph, but the others were not still. One swung its arm like a blade, sending 3 men crashing lifeless to the ground. Another released a pulse of sound that cracked stone and bone alike, scattering those too close. The 2 caught in nets tore free, cords snapping like twigs. The settlers did not break. For every one who fell, 2 more leapt forward. They climbed onto the metal bodies, hammering with stones, driving fire into joints, prying plates loose with crowbars. The valley filled with smoke and sparks, with the clang of iron against alien alloy, with the cries of rage and agony. When the last harvester fell, its body toppling like a felled tree, the settlers stood bloodied but unbroken. 14 of their own lay dead. 5 of the enemy lay shattered. It was not victory, it was survival, but it was enough. That night the settlers feasted not on abundance but on defiance. The grain stores were nearly empty, the rivers still fouled, yet they lit fires and told the children that they had won. They sang songs half forgotten from earth, voices raw but fierce. Aurelian sat apart, staring at the broken fragment of metal he had pried from a harvester's chest. It pulsed faintly like a dying ember. Inside it he thought he saw patterns, tiny, intricate, like the weaving of roots beneath soil. He did not understand it, but he knew it mattered. Callister joined him, settling onto the stone beside him. She, too, looked at the fragment. "They will come harder next time," she said. "I know. They will not forgive this. I know." She turned her gaze to him. "And still you would fight?" Aurelian's jaw tightened. "What else is there? If we run, they take us one by one until nothing is left. If we kneel, they will grind us into the same dust as our fields. At least this way we choose the ground of our dying." Callister studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out, placed her hand on the shard, and pressed it into his palm. "Then let us see how far we can drive them back." In the days that followed, word spread. Settlers from outlying homesteads, those who had thought themselves alone in their misery, came to the valley. They brought little, some food, some tools, but more importantly, they brought numbers. Soon there were 300 gathered in Calrose, more than had ever stood together since the harvesters' arrival. They trained as best they could. Children learned to carry water to the fighters. The women who had once been teachers and farmers drilled with spears. The elders who could no longer fight told stories by the fire, reminding them all of who they were. And Aurelian, whether he wished it or not, became something more than a farmer with an axe. He became the man who had bled the unbleeding, the one who had proven that humanity was not yet broken. He did not feel like a hero. His hands ached from callus. His dreams were filled with faces of the dead. But when the settlers looked at him, he met their eyes and did not look away. That was enough. It had to be, because on the horizon more harvesters marched, and the storm was building again. The storm returned on the 6th night. The settlers had grown used to watching the sky, reading its moods like hunters study the twitch of a deer's ear. They saw the clouds gather, crimson veins streaking across their depths, and they knew what was coming. Yet knowing did not ease the terror when the air began to vibrate, when sparks leapt across the ground, and every tool in their hands turned suddenly heavy, unresponsive, as though unseen chains pulled at them. This time, the settlers did not scatter. They had dug trenches, built barricades of stone and timber, hollowed pits lined with fire. They were ready to meet the storm with their teeth bared, but the harvesters did not descend at once. Instead, the storm hung in the sky like a wound, stretching across the stars. From within it came a sound, low and steady, like a drum beaten in the deep earth. The settlers clutched their ears. Children wept, not from fear but from pain. The sound crawled into the bones and would not leave. Aurelian Stathis stood at the barricade, axe in hand, watching the storm. His knuckles were white, his jaw clenched. He wanted them to come. He wanted the crash of steel, the spray of molten blood, anything to silence the waiting. Callister Aeon moved beside him. "They are learning," she said. He glanced at her. "Learning what? That we are not so easy to cut down." The words were meant as steel, but there was unease in them. Aurelian felt it too. This was not the blunt advance of machines. This was calculation, study. When at last the harvesters appeared, they did not march in a straight column. They spread across the valley like hunters circling prey. Their molten veins burned brighter than before, their movements sharper. These were not the testing probes of earlier days. These were predators who had taken the measure of resistance and come prepared. The settlers met them with fury. Flaming arrows streaked across the night. Pits roared to life as oil ignited. Nets snapped tight around metal limbs. The valley shook with shouts and screams. Aurelian hurled himself into the fray. His axe bit into a harvester's knee joint, molten fluid hissing against the dirt. He tore the weapon free, swung again, and felt the shudder of metal failing beneath his strength. The machine toppled, and settlers swarmed it, driving spears into every seam. But elsewhere, the fight did not go so well. One harvester lifted its arm and released a pulse that shattered timber and bone alike. Another swept through a barricade, scattering defenders like straw. For every one that fell, 3 settlers lay dead or dying. And still the harvesters did not press their advantage. When the storm broke and the machines withdrew, leaving behind shattered earth and broken bodies, Aurelian felt no triumph. He saw mothers screaming over lifeless children, fathers staring blankly at the ruins of their homes. The harvesters had taken no captives this time. That was what chilled him most. They buried their dead by the river, 57 lives lost in a single night. The ground was too hard to dig so many graves, so they built pyres instead, flames licking into the sky as if to challenge the heavens themselves. The settlers did not sing. They did not speak. They stood in silence, the firelight reflecting in their eyes, and let the grief harden into something colder. When the flames had burned low, Callister called the leaders together. Aurelian, the smith Merrick with his soot-streaked hands, the huntress Selene whose traps had killed more harvesters than any blade, and half a dozen others who had risen by necessity rather than choice. They met in the broken granary tower, shadows flickering across their faces. "They are not fighting to destroy us," Callister said. "If they wished to, they could sweep across this valley in a single night and leave nothing behind." Selene spat into the dirt. "Then what do they want?" No one answered. It was Aurelian who finally spoke. "They took people before, not food, not materials, people, and tonight they took none. That means the ones they already have still serve some purpose." Merrick's jaw tightened. "Then the purpose must be ended." A murmur of agreement circled the room. Callister raised a hand. "We do not know where they take them." "Then we find out," Aurelian said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade. All eyes turned to him. "They leave trails," he continued. "Not footprints alone. The earth melts where they walk. If we follow, we may find where they keep the taken. And if we find that," he did not finish. He did not need to. The settlers leaned closer, caught between fear and desperate hope. Callister studied Aurelian for a long time, then she nodded. "A small band, no more than a dozen. If the rest vanish, the valley cannot endure. But if we succeed, Aurelian said, "we will know why they have come." The scouting band set out 2 nights later, moving under clouded skies. Aurelian led them, axe strapped across his back. Selene moved at his side, bow in hand, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Merrick trudged behind, carrying a hammer too heavy for most men but light in his arms. 9 others came, farmers turned fighters, men and women who had lost too much to turn back. They followed the melted trails across the hills, through ravines where the rock still shimmered faintly as if from unseen heat. They traveled in silence, speaking only with gestures, for the harvesters' senses were unknown and none wished to test them. On the 4th night, they saw the first sign. Across the plain rose a structure unlike anything they had known. It was not built of stone or timber, but of the same alloy as the harvesters' bodies, veins of molten light crawling across its surface. It pulsed, faintly at first, then stronger as though it breathed. The band lay prone in the grass, staring at it. "What is it?" whispered one of the farmers. "A prison," Aurelian said. His voice was hoarse. "It must be." Selene's eyes narrowed, or worse. They crept closer, hearts pounding. The structure loomed higher with each step, until it towered above them like a mountain of steel. Strange sounds emanated from within, low hums, sudden cracks, whispers that made the skin crawl. At last, they reached an outcropping of rock that overlooked the structure's base, and there they saw rows upon rows of human figures suspended in the air within frames of glowing metal. Men, women, even children, their bodies slack, their eyes closed. Cables of light ran from their temples into the structure, pulsing in time with the veins across its surface. The settlers froze, horror rooting them to the spot. "They are alive," Selene whispered. "For now," Aurelian said. He could not look away. He recognized faces among them, neighbors, kin, the boy who had once brought water to the fields, the old woman who had sung lullabies by the fire, all suspended, all drained of something unseen. Merek's voice was a growl. "What are they doing to them?" Aurelian's hand tightened on the axe. He did not know, he did not want to know. But he understood one truth with perfect clarity. Whatever it was, it could not be allowed to continue. They withdrew to the shelter of the rocks, breaths ragged, minds reeling. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Callista's words, spoken days before, echoed in Aurelian's mind. "They will not stop until every one of us is gone." Now he knew why. The harvesters were not killing them. They were consuming something deeper, not flesh, not blood, something that made them human, and if they succeeded, there would be nothing left but silence. Aurelian looked at his companions, saw the same realization in their eyes, and spoke the words none dared yet say. "We burn it." The plan was madness. They had no fire strong enough, no weapon sharp enough to wound such a thing. But the settlers were not strangers to impossible labors. They had crossed the void to claim a new world. They had wrestled life from stubborn soil. They had faced storms that could rip the sky apart. If this was their fate, then they would meet it with fire. Selene scouted the perimeter. She found vents where the molten veins burned brightest, places where the structure drew breath. Merek studied the stone and declared they could channel oil through trenches, ignite it in one furious wave. The farmers carried jars of pitch on their backs, heavier than they could bear but never once set down. On the fifth night, they were ready. They moved like shadows, digging trenches, pouring oil, laying fuses of twisted cloth. The structure pulsed, unaware or uncaring. The suspended figures twitched faintly, as though in dreams. When the last jar was emptied, Aurelian stood at the head of the trench, torch in hand. He looked once more at the imprisoned faces, and his heart nearly broke. "We free them," he said. Then he dropped the torch. The valley lit as if the sun had been torn from the sky. Fire roared through the trenches, raced up the vents, leapt across the veins of molten light. The structure shuddered, a sound like the wail of mountains splitting filling the air. The suspended figures convulsed, then collapsed to the ground as the cables snapped. For a moment, triumph surged. The settlers rushed forward, dragging the freed bodies away from the flames. Some stirred, groaning, eyes fluttering. Others lay still, breath shallow but present. But then the ground quaked. From the structure's heart, figures emerged. Not 5, not 10, dozens. Their molten veins burned hotter than any before, their movements swift and merciless. The harvesters had been waiting. The settlers froze, firelight dancing on their faces. Aurelian lifted his axe. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Then we finish what we started." And with a roar, the battle began. The fire burned hotter than the settlers had believed possible. The ground itself seemed to writhe under its fury, veins of molten light bursting like arteries, casting the valley in a hellish glow. The structure screamed, a sound that had no voice yet tore through every mind like glass. The air reeked of scorched metal and something fouler still, something that smelled like burning flesh even though no bodies were in the flames. And through the fire, the harvesters came. Aurelian Stathies had no time to think, only to act. His axe met the first of them with a ringing crash that rattled his bones. Sparks flew, molten ichor spilled, and the machine staggered. Before it could recover, Selene's arrow punched through the gap in its neck, glowing bright as it pierced whatever essence flowed within. The harvester collapsed, its body twitching, flames crawling along its veins. But for every one that fell, 5 more advanced. They came with speed the settlers had never seen, leaping the trenches, tearing through the barricades of stone. One landed among them, its arm cleaving downward like a guillotine. A farmer screamed as his body was split in two. Merrick bellowed and swung his hammer with all the strength of years in the forge, crushing the harvester's arm and sending it staggering into the fire. The settlers fought like demons. Axes, hammers, spears, fire, every crude weapon struck with desperation sharpened into fury. The harvesters bled, and every hiss of molten ichor drove the humans into greater frenzy. But the cost was terrible. Bodies littered the ground. Men and women who had stood together moments before now lay broken, their blood mingling with the glowing fluid of their enemies. Through the chaos, Aurelian saw what mattered most. The freed captives lay scattered near the fire's edge, some stirring weakly, others still as stone. If they were left behind, if the harvesters reclaimed them, all would be lost. "Selene," he roared above the din, "take them, get them out." She looked at him once, eyes blazing, then nodded and whistled sharply. 3 of the settlers broke from the fight, gathering the limp bodies in their arms, dragging them toward the rocks. A harvester turned toward them. Its veins burned white, brighter than any before. Aurelian ran to intercept, his axe raised high. The blow landed true, splitting through the chest plate, but the machine did not fall. Instead it caught the axe in its clawed hand, wrenched it free, and hurled Aurelian to the ground. His vision swam. The harvester loomed above, arm raised for the killing strike. And then Merrick was there. The blacksmith's hammer swung in a perfect arc, striking the harvester's head with a sound like thunder. The machine's skull crumpled inward, molten ichor spraying in a fountain. It toppled backward, twitching, lifeless. Merrick reached down, hauled Aurelian to his feet. His face was streaked with blood and soot, his eyes blazing. "On your feet, boy, we are not done." Together they plunged back into the fray. The settlers fought not for victory, but for survival. They bought each heartbeat with blood, dragging the freed captives one by one into the shelter of the rocks. The fire spread, devouring the structure, its screams echoing across the valley. The harvesters pressed harder, their molten veins pulsing like the fury of a storm. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ground shuddered. The structure collapsed inward, folding like a dying beast. The flames roared higher, consuming it utterly. The harvesters froze, their movements faltering, their veins flickering. For the first time, Aurelian saw something he had thought impossible. They hesitated. In that hesitation, the settlers struck. Hammers crushed, axes split, torches burned. One by one the harvesters fell, their bodies twitching as their veins dimmed to black. And then silence. The fire raged, but no more machines came. The valley lay littered with broken bodies, human and harvester alike. The settlers stood gasping, covered in blood and soot, staring at the ruins of what they had wrought. They had destroyed it. They had burned the prison, and they had lived, for now. Aurelian leaned on his axe, chest heaving, staring at the broken husk of the structure. The freed captives lay nearby, groaning, some whispering words too faint to hear. Selene knelt among them, her face grim, her hands gentle as she checked each one. Merrick dropped beside a stone, hammer across his lap, blood dripping from his forehead. He gave a hoarse laugh. "By the forge, boy, we have done what none thought possible." Aurelian did not laugh. His gaze lingered on the freed captives, on the strange faint glow still pulsing at their temples. Something had been done to them, something not undone by fire. "We are not finished," he said. His voice was raw but steady. "This was only one, there will be others." Callister arrived with the last of the survivors, her face pale but unbowed. She looked at the ruins, then at the freed captives, then at Aurelian. "You are right," she said. "This is only the beginning." They gathered the wounded, carried the freed captives as best they could, and left the valley before dawn. Behind them, the fire burned on, a pyre to mark the first time the harvesters had truly lost. Yet none of the settlers felt triumph. They had glimpsed something darker. The faces of the freed captives haunted them, slack, pale, eyes hollow even when open. They were alive, yes, but not whole. Something had been drained from them, something unseen but undeniable. And the settlers knew that whatever the harvesters sought, it lay not in their soil, not in their homes, but in themselves. They marched in silence, the dawn painting the sky in ash and crimson. The captives did not speak at first. They shuffled when walked, they ate when fed, they lay still when laid down. Their eyes were glass, their movements like shadows of the people they had once been. The settlers cared for them, wrapped them in blankets, whispered their names in hopes of sparking recognition. But it was like tending to husks, until the third night. Aurelian was on watch, sitting by the embers of a dying fire, axe across his knees. The valley behind them still glowed faintly with the ruin of the harvester structure. The night was quiet, too quiet, the silence of a world holding its breath. He heard movement and turned sharply, ready for an attack. But it was only one of the freed captives, a boy of no more than 16. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, yet he walked with surprising steadiness. He stopped before Aurelian, staring at him with unblinking eyes. "They see you," the boy said. Aurelian's breath caught. "What? They see you," the boy repeated. His voice was flat, empty, as though it were not his own. "Through us, they see what you do, they hear what you say, they know your fire." Aurelian rose slowly, axe in hand. "Who sees?" The boy blinked, and for an instant his eyes glowed faintly, the same molten light as the harvester's veins. "They do." Then he collapsed, limp as a doll, breath shallow but steady. Aurelian knelt beside him, heart pounding. He stared at the boy's pale face, the faint glow that still pulsed beneath his skin, and felt a chill deeper than any fear he had known. The harvesters were not only consuming, they were watching. At dawn, Aurelian told Callister what had happened. She listened without interrupting, her expression grave. When he finished, she turned to look at the freed captives, still lying like husks among the settlers. "Then we carry spies among us," she said. "Not spies," Aurelian said. "Slaves, they are bound even when freed. The harvesters still hold them." Selene spat into the dirt. "Then we should put them to the fire and be done." "No," Callister's voice was sharp. "They are our people still. We do not cast them aside because they suffer." Selene's eyes narrowed. "And what happens when the harvesters see through their eyes and bring the storm upon us again? Will you still say they are only victims?" The settlers muttered, fear gnawing at their hearts. Aurelian raised his hand for silence. "We cannot kill them, but we cannot leave them undefended either. If the harvesters see through them, then we must find a way to turn that gaze against them. If they watch us, then we must decide what to show." The words were heavy, but they struck like sparks in dry grass. The settlers looked at one another, hope flickering amidst their fear. Callister studied Aurelian, then gave a single nod. "Then we find a way." And so, even as they mourned and buried their dead, even as they tended the wounded and rationed their food, the settlers began to plan, not just for survival, not just for resistance, but for something greater. They had seen the harvester's blade, they had burned one of their prisons, and now they had glimpsed their secret. The war was no longer defense alone. It was the beginning of something more. The beginning of a fight not only to endure, but to prevail. The settlers moved east, away from the Valley of Fire, away from the ruin of the harvester prison. Their numbers were fewer now, but their hearts beat with a strange, dangerous rhythm. They had not only survived, they had struck back. The knowledge of it was a burden and a fire both. The freed captives were carried with them, some borne on makeshift litters, others staggering on unsteady legs. Their eyes remained hollow, their speech rare, but their bodies clung stubbornly to life. Aurelian watched them closely. He remembered the boy's words, the glow in his eyes, the voice that had not been his own. "They see you." The memory gnawed at him, a warning that silence itself could be a weapon against them. The march was long, days bleeding into nights. Food dwindled, water grew scarce, yet none spoke of turning back. The settlers knew there was nowhere safe to return to. Safety was an illusion now, stripped from them as surely as the soil had been stripped of harvest. At last they reached the cliffs of Ilion, sheer faces of stone rising like walls against the sky. Caves honeycombed the cliffs, carved by time and wind, hidden from the plain below. Here the settlers made their camp, fires deep within the caverns, smoke venting through cracks no eye could see. It was not home. Nothing could be called home anymore. But it was shelter, and shelter was a weapon when wielded wisely. Within those caverns, the settlers began to change. Merek and the smiths set to work, forging weapons from scavenged scrap, tempering steel in secret fires. Selene led bands into the hills, teaching them to hunt, to lay snares not only for beasts, but for machines. Children learned to carry stone and water with grim determination, their laughter stilled but their eyes burning. And Callista Aen gathered them by night, speaking not of despair but of defiance. She told them that humanity had crossed the void once and would cross it again, that no machine, no storm, no prison could unmake what lived in their hearts. She told them that every day they endured was a blade driven into the harvester's arrogance. The settlers listened and they believed, yet always at the edge of their camp lay the freed captives. Aurelian visited them each night, watching, waiting. Some began to speak in fragments, names whispered like half-remembered dreams, pleas for water, cries for mothers long dead. But others remained silent, eyes unfocused, as though their spirits had been locked away. It was on the seventh night in the caves that the truth revealed itself. The boy who had spoken before rose once more. His body was thin, his skin pale, but his steps were steady. He walked to the fire where Aurelian sat sharpening his axe, and again the settlers turned to watch. "They feed," the boy said, voice flat. "They feed on us." A hush fell. Callista knelt before him, her hand gentle on his arm. "What do they take?" The boy's eyes glowed faintly, molten light pulsing like veins beneath the skin. "Not flesh, not blood. They drink what makes us, the fire in the mind, the spark that dreams. They do not dream, they do not feel. They take it from us and it fills them. Without us they are empty." The words chilled the air. Selene spat into the fire. "Then they are nothing but thieves." The boy turned his hollow gaze upon her. "Thieves who have forgotten they are thieves. They believe it theirs by right. They believe they were born to it. But it is not theirs, it is ours." The glow in his eyes flickered, then dimmed. He collapsed once more, limp as before. Settlers rushed to him, but his breath was steady. He slept. Aurelian looked into the fire, the boy's words searing themselves into his mind. The spark that dreams, humanity's essence stolen, drained, devoured. And yet the boy had said it plainly, it was theirs, not the harvester's. "Do you see it?" Callista asked, her voice low. "I see," Aurelian said. "They cannot make what we are, they can only take it." "And that means," Aurelian said, gripping his axe, "we have what they cannot fight." The settlers stared at one another. The weight of revelation pressed on them like the stone of the caverns. The harvesters had power, storms, steel, molten veins of fire. But humans had something else, something unseen, something the machines hungered for and yet could never create. It was not strength of arm. It was not cunning of trap. It was something deeper. The dream, the will, the spark. Days passed and whispers spread among the settlers. Some feared the freed captives, afraid of the glow in their eyes. Others looked upon them as oracles, touched by knowledge too terrible to be born of men alone. The captives spoke rarely, but when they did, their words were strange, cryptic. One whispered of rivers running backward, another of stars burning black. A woman cried out in the night, naming names of those who had died years before, and yet, in their madness, there was clarity. Again and again, their words circled the same truth. The harvesters were hollow. Without the stolen essence of humanity, they were lifeless, powerless. The settlers began to see their fight in a new light. It was not only a war for land, not only a struggle for survival. It was a war for the essence of humanity itself. If they fell, the spark would be extinguished. If they endured, the spark would burn brighter than ever. It was Selene who brought the first proof. She had led a band into the hills, stalking a lone harvester that wandered apart from its kin. They brought it down with fire and stone, dragging its broken body back to the caves. The smiths pried open its chest, and there, deep within, they found a crystal of pale light, pulsing faintly. It was not metal, nor stone, nor anything they had known. And within it, if one looked closely, one could see faint images flickering, faces, voices, memories not their own. The settlers recoiled. "It is them," Callister whispered. "The people they took, trapped within, bound to power the machine." Merrick spat, his face black with soot. "Abomination." Aurelian stared at the crystal, fury boiling within him. "Then we free them, not with fire, with will." "How?" Selene asked, her eyes sharp with doubt. Aurelian reached out, laid his hand upon the crystal. It pulsed beneath his palm, warm, alive. He closed his eyes and thought not of war, not of fire, but of faces. His father's laughter, his mother's voice, the songs sung by the fire when the world had still been kind. He poured them into his grip, into his mind, into the crystal. For a moment, nothing. Then the crystal flared. The settlers gasped as the faint faces flickered brighter, as the light swelled, as a whisper filled the cavern. "We are here." And then the crystal shattered, light spilling out like a river of stars. It poured into the air, into the stone, into the hearts of those gathered, and was gone. The harvester husk slumped lifeless, darker than any corpse. The settlers stared, breathless. "You freed them," Callister said, wonder in her voice. Aurelian opened his eyes. They burned, not with fire but with something deeper. "Not me, us, humanity. That is what they cannot steal. That is what they fear." The cavern echoed with silence, then with whispers, then with cries that rose into shouts. The settlers understood now. The war was not only to kill the harvesters. It was to free those bound within, to reclaim what was stolen, to wield humanity's own spark as weapon. And for the first time, the settlers felt not only anger, not only grief, but something brighter: hope. That night, Callister stood before the settlers, torchlight casting her shadow tall against the stone. "They came for us because they are empty. They came for us because they cannot dream. They came for us because they cannot be what we are, and now we know the truth." Her voice rang like steel. "They are not gods, they are thieves, and thieves can be broken." The settlers roared their answer, voices shaking the cavern walls. Aurelian stood among them, axe in hand, heart pounding. He knew what was coming. The harvesters would not stop. They would come in numbers greater than before, storms darker than any they had seen. But now humanity had a weapon the machines could never wield. Not fire, not steel, the spark. And Aurelian vowed that he would carry it into battle until the stars themselves bore witness. The wind howled along the cliffs of Ilion, carrying with it the distant thunder of storm. It was not the storm of rain or lightning, not the storm of sky, but the storm of the harvesters. Their engines rolled like distant drums, their fires burned like dawn at midnight, and their hunger pressed against the land like a tide. The settlers had seen it before. They had seen villages swallowed, fields scorched, families broken. But this time they did not hide. This time they prepared. In the caverns, hammers rang like bells. Sparks leapt into darkness as the smiths forged weapons of steel and stone. The younger ones sharpened spearheads, bound arrows, filled clay jars with oil and pitch. Hunters returned from the hills with stores of food, with pelts for warmth, with herbs for wounds yet to be made. The freed captives lay in the deepest chambers, tended by the healers. Some still stared blankly at the stone, but others whispered more clearly now. They spoke of what they had seen while bound to the harvesters, of the chambers where crystals glowed, of the endless march of machines across lands unseen. Their voices carried sorrow, but also maps, warnings, truths. And at the center of it all stood Aurelian Stathias, his axe polished until it gleamed like silver fire. He did not speak often. Words had weight now, too much to waste. He listened to Callister's counsel, to Merrick's wisdom, to Selene's sharp-tongued honesty. He listened most of all to the silence between words, the silence where fear lurked, but also where resolve was born. When the scouts returned, breathless, they brought the truth none doubted, yet all dreaded. "They come," one gasped, falling to his knees. "Not a handful, not a patrol, an army. The valley below is black with their number. Their veins glow like rivers. Their storm devours the horizon." The cavern filled with murmurs, gasps, cries. Some clenched their fists, others trembled. Children hid their faces in their mothers' cloaks. Callista rose, her staff in hand, her voice calm as she called for silence. Then the moment is upon us. We knew it would come, and now it has. We have struck them once, and they have come to strike back. But this time we do not cower. This time we do not flee. This time we show them what it means to fight not for survival, but for the fire within us. The settlers roared their answer, a sound born not of numbers but of spirit. That night they lit no fires. They ate little, spoke little, slept little. They sat together in silence, hand upon hand, shoulder against shoulder, hearts steady. They knew dawn would bring battle. They knew many would not see its end. Aurelian lay awake, staring at the cavern ceiling, the axe at his side. He thought of the faces bound within crystals, the voices crying out, "We are here." He thought of the boys' hollow gaze, of the words, "They see you." He thought of his people, small against the storm, yet burning brighter than the stars. And he whispered to himself, not in despair but in promise, they will see us." When dawn broke, it broke red. The harvesters filled the valley, thousands upon thousands. Their bodies glowed with molten veins, their limbs clanged with the weight of steel. Above them circled constructs like great carrion birds, wings spread, eyes glowing. The air shook with their presence, the ground trembled with their march. The settlers took their place at the cliff's edge. Spears bristled, bows bent, jars of fire stood ready. Children too young to fight carried water and stones. Elders too frail to wield blades sharpened arrows and whispered blessings. At the front stood Aurelian, axe in hand. Beside him Callista raised her staff, Selene drew her bow, Merek hefted his hammer. The harvesters advanced. The first wave struck like thunder, climbing the cliffs with claws of steel. Arrows rained down, spears thrust, stones tumbled. Jars of fire burst upon them, flames consuming molten veins. The settlers fought not as scattered prey, but as one body, one will. The cliff became a furnace of war. Aurelian met the first harvester with a roar, his axe cleaving through its chest. Molten ichor sprayed, burning his arm, but he did not falter. Merek swung his hammer, shattering limbs, driving machines back into the abyss. Selene's arrows pierced glowing veins, each shot finding a seam, a weakness. Callista's staff struck like lightning, each blow ringing with the weight of faith. But for every harvester that fell, more rose. The cliffs trembled under their weight, their storm darkened the sky. The settlers' lines wavered, their cries turned to screams. And then, at the heart of battle, the freed captives came. They staggered from the caverns, eyes glowing faintly, bodies frail but unbroken. They stood at the cliff's edge, raised their hands, and the glow within them pulsed outward. The harvesters faltered. Through the captives, through the glow, the settlers saw it, the tether that bound the machines to the spark they had stolen. A web of light, threads of essence drawn from human souls, fueling hollow vessels. Callista cried out, voice ringing above the storm, "Break the tether, free what they have stolen." Aurelian raised his axe high, not at the machines, but at the sky. He thought not of death, not of fear, but of faces, of laughter, of songs, of dreams yet to be born. He poured them into his cry, into his will, into the spark. The freed captives screamed as one, their voices not of pain, but of release. The glow burst outward, threads snapping, crystals shattering within the harvesters' chests. The machines convulsed. One by one, their veins dimmed, their limbs froze, their bodies crumbled. The storm above faltered, the carrion constructs fell, wings folding as they struck the earth. The settlers seized the moment. With axes, hammers, arrows, fire, they drove into the weakened wave. They struck with fury sharpened into purpose, every blow a song of defiance. The valley shook, not with the march of machines, but with the roar of humanity. When it ended, the ground lay black with husks. The air stank of molten ichor and smoke. The cliffs were slick with blood, human and harvester alike. Bodies lay still, both settler and machine, but the harvesters were broken. For the first time, an army of them had fallen. For the first time, the storm had been silenced. The settlers stood gasping, weeping, embracing. They had not won the war, but they had won a battle that would echo. Aurelian stood at the cliff's edge, axe dripping, eyes burning. He looked out at the ruin below, at the broken machines, at the light rising in the east. "They will come again," Selene said beside him, her bow hanging at her side. "Yes," Aurelian said. "They will come in greater number," Merrick rumbled, his hammer resting on his shoulder. "Yes," Aurelian said. Callista placed her hand upon his arm. Her voice was steady, quiet, yet it carried more than steel. "And so will we." Aurelian turned to the people, to the children with blood on their hands, to the elders with tears in their eyes, to the freed captives who still glowed faintly with the spark. He raised his axe high, and his voice rang across the cliffs. "We are not prey, we are not soil to be stripped, we are not fire to be stolen, we are humanity and we will endure." The settlers roared their answer, their voices rolling like thunder across the valley, and in that roar was more than defiance. It was promise. The war was not over. The harvesters would return, hungrier, angrier, emptier. But now humanity had shown the truth. The spark could not be stolen forever. The spark could fight back. The spark would burn. And as the sun rose red over the cliffs of Ilion, humanity stood bloodied, broken, yet unyielding. The harvesters had come for their dream and found their nightmare.